go around and introduce ourselves, please. I'm the chair of Strong Communities, and I'm County Councillor Lisa Dimmock for the Elms ND.
I'm Hazel Eilert, I'm the Council's Scrutiny Manager.
Hi, I'm Robert McGowan, Scrutiny and Policy Officer. I just started.
Andrew Blake, Y Valley AONB Manager.
Ruth Rourke, Countryside Access Manager.
Matthew Lewis, Environment and Culture Manager for MonLife.
Councillor Roger Harris, Cresson Ward, Abergavenny, and member of this committee.
Linda Guppy, a member for Roggett Ward and member of this committee. Good morning.
Brian Strong, I'm not a member of the committee, but I'm standing in for Jamie Treharne, who's not able to come.
Peter Clark, member for Langibby.
Councillor David Dovey, St King's Mark Ward, Chepstow, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, everybody. Anne Webb, I'm a member of this committee and also the member for Tintern and St Arvan's Ward. Thank you.
I'm Councillor Tony Easton, member for Dewstow Ward and member of this committee.
Councillor Val Smith, and Lambeth Ward, member of this committee.
Councillor Phil Murphy, member for Cowent and Cabinet member for Resources.
Peter Sutherland, Lambeth Community Council.
Ian Saunders, Chief Operating Officer for MonLife.
Dave Loader, Central Finance.
Thank you all. And we only have Jamie Treherne. Apologies, but obviously Councillor Brian Strong has kindly stepped in. I'll take it to item 3, open public forum. Mr. Sutherland, would you like to speak?
Thank you very much indeed, and a happy new year to the committee, and appreciate the opportunity to address you on 3 issues this morning. I'll keep it brief. The first is there is the public consultation on the final draft for the Usk regeneration plan next Wednesday, and could I, on behalf of the Community Council, acknowledge the resources and initiative and the support that have gone in from both members and officers of the County Council. I think it demonstrates as well the real value of town community councils working in conjunction with the County Council. That's the good news. The second issue I'd like to raise is when I was here last time, I raised some issues around Monkswood, both parking outside St Matthew's Church and indeed signage there regarding speed limits. All we asked for was a meeting on site. We wrote again on the 2nd of December via our clerk of the Community Council, and I regret to inform you nothing has happened. In the eyes of the electors, I believe that the County Council doesn't come out smelling of roses on this one. On behalf of the Community Council, we look inept and not really of any value to our community. I wonder if we could just ask again, either for a progress update or for the site meeting we requested 2 or 3 months ago. I'm sorry to raise that as a fairly negative issue, but it does affect us as a community council in terms of how we can support our community.
Thank you, Mr. Sutherland. I will chase that up for you this week. Is that okay? Thank you. Councillor Eason?
Yes, Chair. Who is the chair of the Central Mon Area Committee, who would probably deal with this more directly than us as a committee?
I'll speak to Jamie. Is that okay?
Well, yeah, I know the Central Mon Area Committee is there for those purposes, and it would take it from
Absolutely.
this level
That's a
down
good point.
to the right man.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. This, you may not be surprised to know, is about the potential closure of the Usk Recycling Centre. We've already getting a lot of feedback. There's a cluster meeting next week, and obviously that will be the forum for perhaps more detailed debate, but we would like to put on record as our community council that we have strong objections to the potential closure. 3 main issues. We believe that there will be a considerable increase in fly tipping. We also wonder what it's doing for the carbon footprint of the council, and we also have concerns around how it's going to affect the elderly in Usk and Lambeth. One example given to us by one of our community is that the closure will require them to be making a round trip of an extra 12 miles a week. To put that in perspective, that's a journey from Usk to Inverness if that was repeated week after week, just to give some perspective to it. Trying to be positive, we do wonder about the potential for joint working with Torfine, because they themselves have a tip and they have an 88% recycling rate at that tip. And we wonder whether there's the potential here, as with the Usk regeneration scheme, whether there's the potential for some joint working which might get, dare I say it, the County Council out of a bind and indeed give us something positive to give our members. We'd welcome you taking that issue on board, and we will again, as we say, be raising it at the cluster meeting next week. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Phil. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And on that subject, the cluster meeting on Tuesday evening will be here at in the conference room downstairs. I'll be doing the budget presentation, but Francis O'Brien and Carl Tuig are doing a separate presentation on the Usk transfers site. So you'll have every opportunity at that meeting. We've set up a special part of the meeting just solely to deal with that, so it doesn't get mixed up with the budget. Because what I was concerned about when I had a look at it was that we wouldn't be able to give sufficient time to the transfer station during part of the budget discussion, and it was too important to just mix up with something else. So it's going to be done separately at that meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
To follow on from Councillor Eason's point, that this particular topic, the recycling, had a very healthy discussion at the Central Monmouth Area Committee, which is open to all community councillors, and it would be very good to see a broader attention. So well represented, points made by us council. So the issue is alive and whatever.
Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On our pre-meeting, we talked about this generally, but for information, it is going to another committee, which you will be asking for an invitation to this committee.
Thank you all. I will now move on to item 4. Mr. Sutherland, you're more than welcome to stay if you wish, or you can, that's fine. I will now hand over to Andrew, Ruth and Matthew on the Rights Away Improvement Plan.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say a few words around the report and then throw it open to questions and answers. Just to set this into context for members, the Rights Away Improvement Plan, although we've taken the decision to call it a Countryside Access Improvement Plan because we've embraced the countryside sites that we manage into this as well as the Rights of Way. But the Rights of Way Improvement Plan is a statutory plan. It's required under the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. So it has been subject to quite an extensive development process which Ruth has led, and most recently subject to statutory consultation at 12 weeks, which actually we extended to 14 weeks to accommodate some consultees just before Christmas. So this is pre-decision scrutiny prior to us taking it to Cabinet on the 19th of February. The summary of the consultation responses, which I'm sure you've seen, is Appendix 2. And a copy of the proposed final plan which illustrates the changes that as a result of consultation was Appendix 3. We took the Rights of Way Improvement Plan as we're required to do so to the Local Access Forum yesterday. There were some very minor sort of one spelling mistake effectively and one slight grammatical change, but apart from that the Local Access Forum is content with this as the final draft of the ROIP. And so the next step, subject to your consideration in Cabinet, would be for us to prepare the first version of what is required under the legislation, which is an annual ROIP delivery plan, which we will then publish alongside the finally approved plan. If it's okay, Chair, that was all I was going to say at the moment, and then we'll throw it open to questions and answers.
Thank you, Matthew. I will now hand over to members. Members, any questions? Councillor Guppy.
Thank you, Matthew, for this report. It's very detailed and it's very inclusive. As we know, the countryside team has always been very thinly spread, and with the extra sort of responsibilities and inclusive of all access to the countryside, how are we going to manage this? And it also says in the report about the financial implications. How are we going to deal with these problems, particularly as we're such a rural county? And it, you know, but the benefits, well, you can go and stay here for hours to say about the benefits of that, but financial and sort of general health.
I'll let Ruth say, perhaps add to this in a minute, but I mean, you're absolutely right. We start from a base where the number of reported issues we have on the Rights of Way network is significantly greater than the resources that we have to deal with that. And as a result of that, we have a issue prioritisation system, which members previously approved, which effectively, you know, it prioritises what we can spend money on the day-to-day basis in terms of maintenance, because both our maintenance and capital budget are obviously quite limited. As part of this exercise, we worked out as part of the assessments what an ideal budget would look like, and it's about 10 times what we currently spend, and that would ensure asset renewal. So the approach that we've very much taken in the past, and I think is embedded in this plan, is to demonstrate really the benefits that arise from countryside access. You know, not saying it's just a statutory responsibility, therefore we need to do it, but to demonstrate those health and well-being benefits. And that then enables us to try to access external funding, which we've been quite successful in doing, and we continue to be. So we feed it into other programs like many members will be aware, the Living Levels programme that has quite a considerable access investment in the Gwent levels. Working with the AONB, for example, in terms of resources for some of the regional routes like Wye Valley. I think, you know, there's no getting away from it. There are still problems there. One of the issues, which I know members and sort of the central Monmouthshire have raised in the past, is that those individual groups grants tend to be concentrated around some of the tourism routes, the coast, the Wye Valley, etc., which does make it quite difficult to find additional resources in areas which are perhaps less sort of tourist developed. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, Ruth.
It's obviously always been very challenging. We along with the assessment reports, I did an extra one on policies and procedures, and we reviewed all our procedures and how we worked in light of the plan, so we could make it clear to the public how we work now, how we're going to change the working practices, where we've got prioritisation schemes and things in place, so they can see that. So we've tried, you know, to show that we can't do everything, but what we can do with what we've got. But we've also, as Matthew said, the document's very heavily weighted this time on working in partnerships. We are very fortunate in Monmouthshire in having some really good volunteers and volunteer teams who are helping us to develop the country parks and the rights of way system. And one of the strengths of this ROIP, I think, is trying to find the funding through other means to help address some of those issues that we have with it, to look for more resourcing, to push that forward so that we can do even more good work. But it is always going to be a bit of a struggle, I think, and a challenge. But you know, I think we are fortunate in Monmouthshire that we do have that community backing, and we've already had quite a few people approach us through the draft wanting to do schemes with us. CADU want to pay for some works. Natural Resources Wales are going to do some work with us. I met with the Ramblers yesterday who want to do a signposting campaign with our community councils later this year. So it's already starting to have hopefully some spin-offs, and I hope over future years we can build on that, and we'll end up much stronger position than we are today. Thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Yes, thank you. Ruth has actually answered part of my question. I was going to ask about the volunteers, and you know, we must acknowledge, I think, the amazing work that they do, and we're really, really grateful. I'm just wondering if there's any way that we can actually acknowledge this, and how many volunteers do we have actually? Do you know roughly? Approximately, please, Ruth?
We have about 17 community teams, different types of groups that have got together, and we support those, and about 150 individual volunteers that do different things. There's quite a lot. Just working in the countryside alone, obviously through Mon Life, there's a lot more. And and we hope to try and join up the dots a little bit more, so perhaps some of our tourism ambassadors, you know, can work better with our volunteers on the ground to promote things and things for us. So we are extremely grateful for the help. We're incredibly lucky.
And we obviously provide them with all the equipment needed, and I don't know how far we go with that, but we obviously try as much as we can to help them.
Yes, we are reviewing our policies on that now and looking at how we can further develop things like giving them other equipment like brush cutters so that they can maintain, because one of the issues in the port obviously was with the weather and the climate that we have, grass is growing quicker, so if they can have their own brush cutters and keep clear some of the paths, that makes a massive contribution to us, because our revenue is too limited to do all of that. So we're looking at trying to find new positive ways, working with health and safety officer to look at our policies and see where we can enable them to do more for us where they want to. But they're all different levels, so it's a challenge in itself because they all like to do different things. Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Dovey?
Thank you, Chairman. Paragraphs 3.7 and 3.8 interest me. Once there is a statutory obligation to produce a plan, there is no obligation to deliver the improvements of the plan. This was to encourage authorities to produce plans that were ambitious rather than simply seeking to match the scale of ambition with resource. And then it goes on to say many successful projects, etc. But could you give us an idea of what successful projects have come out of the production of this plan?
I think that particular in 3.8 was particularly relating to the delivery of the first road. This is the second road. This is the review of the existing one. There's a massive range of projects ranging from working with people like the Chepstow Walkers a Welcome group who are really doing some tremendous work in terms of that.
I'm finding it very difficult to hear you.
Sorry. I said there's a really wide range of projects, even from working with the people like the Chepstow Walkers a Welcome group, right through to some quite substantial sort of funded projects that we've done, particularly around, as I say, some of the promoted routes. In terms of the last ROIP, the whole delivery of the Wales Coast Path took place as obviously within the period of the ROIP. So it's just a continual developing different partnerships. We have partnerships with we have a formal partnership with one community council, and we are developing other partnerships with, particularly on the volunteering side. So our experience from the last ROIP is that, and which is why we've repeated it into this one, is that being quite ambitious in terms of those statements of intent is a way to draw in partners and draw in extra funding. If we were just to produce a ROIP that was based on the resources that we've currently got, that would be a very different document, and essentially would be sort of starting to be a bit of a downward spiral. So we think the ambition bit is quite important, because that's what draws future resources in, if that makes sense.
Well, I understand the theory of it. I take your word that it's successful, but yeah, fine. Thank you very much.
Are there any more questions from members? No? Are we happy for me to sum up? Can I thank you all for coming today? Obviously, Councillor Guppy raised some concerns with regards to finances and how you can run your teams. Obviously, we benefit from volunteers and the importance of partnership working. Also, Councillor Webb also raised concerns with regards to volunteers, but it sounds like you've got some fantastic volunteers working with you going forward. Are we happy to let them leave the chamber now today? Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you all very much for coming today. Are you? Oh, of course you are. Of course you are. Okay. So that will now go to Cabinet. Do we have a date that's going to Cabinet now? We'll now move to item 5, Wye Valley AONB Management Plan.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce and then hand over to Andrew, who's, as you know, is the Wye Valley AONB manager. I just wanted to just set this into context in terms of the council's responsibilities. We are collectively responsible with our 3 other local authority partners. That's Herefordshire Council, Gloucestershire County Council, and Forest of Dean Council, to prepare a management plan and keep under review a management plan for the Wye Valley AONB. The preparation of that plan is in effect devolved to the AONB unit and under the guidance of the Joint Advisory Committee. But once the final version is approved by the Joint Advisory Committee, that has to come back to the constituent authorities for their final approval, because the plan is our plan. So this is an opportunity, and Andrew will explain where we are in the process, for you to scrutinise and add any issues that you wish to into the current review. So I'll pass over to Andrew at that point.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing me to speak on this. Yes, the management plan is the core document for the Wye Valley Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. The AONB, the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, extends into England, so we're similarly working with Herefordshire Council, Gloucestershire County Council, Forest of Dean District Council, and yourselves in Monmouthshire. As Matthew explained, this plan is a joint plan for all 4 local authorities, and when published also is sent up to the Welsh Government and to DEFRA in Westminster. We've had a number of 5-year statutory management plans. So this is the latest version or latest edition, and the Joint Advisory Committee, which Councillor Dovey and Councillor Webb are both members of. In fact, Councillor Webb's the current chair of the Joint Advisory Committee. Have accepted or considered this review and accepted that a light touch review was an appropriate, proportionate move at this stage, with so many other uncertainties going on around the country. But we certainly accept that for the next review in 2025, or in the run-up to that, we would do pretty much a complete review, starting almost from a blank sheet of paper in a sense, whereas this has been very much a light touch review, and just brushing up, modifying and bringing up to date the existing plan. We've been out on a 10-week or really a 12-week public consultation. We've had over 20 responses, and in preparation for this report, obviously I had to do the future generations evaluation, and that in itself has thrown up a few sort of minor modifications, which I will be accommodating. So over the next month or so, I'll be assimilating all of those into the finalised version, which will then go to the Joint Advisory Committee in early July, and then, as Matthew said, we'll, assuming that's endorsed, we'll go back to the respective local authorities for adoption. I don't necessarily want to go through, you know, the detailed changes as such, but I'm obviously very happy to answer any questions and any queries any members might have. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Members, do you have any questions regarding this paper or any issues or areas of concern? Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for coming to meet us today. This is a joint venture between Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, Forest of Dean. Have you had a response from those other authorities at the moment, or are we the first one to be discussed there?
Thank you. Yes, good question. We obviously been working very closely at an officer level, right from the start of the review process. So certainly officers from all the local authorities have been involved. Each local authority inevitably has its own processes and procedures, and so I haven't actually been formally involved in committee stages with the other local authorities, but so yes, so it's a pleasure and an honour to be here today. The other local authorities are taking through their own procedures, their own sort of protocols in handling the management plan, but dare I say it, is possibly more robust than some.
I base my question on the options appraisal, which is point 5. There's an option for Monmouthshire not to contribute any more to the Wye Valley in the 2020 to 2025 period, or contribute to the review of the Wye Valley in similar terms, if not exactly the same as at this moment. Perhaps Phil could help us on that, but that's the two options for Monmouthshire County Council.
Not sure I can off the top of my head, Chair, unless Peter can chip in on it. No, so we'll have to come back on that one.
Perhaps I could just intervene there. That's perhaps slightly badly worded. It wasn't intended to be a financial contribution. That was just to be involved in. The financial contributions to the AUNB partnership are already part of our core budget.
Could you explain that then within the countryside? Is it?
Yeah, it is quite complicated, but the way it works is that there is an agreed formula that has been in existence for, well, ever since local government, at least 30 years, which the local authority element of the funding for the AUNB unit is agreed on a formula basis. So we pay approximately 30%, I think, of the local authority funding, which is based on the geographical area. But the vast majority of funding for the unit is provided by direct grant from DEFRA in England, indirect grant from Welsh Government through Natural Resources Wales in Wales, and direct grant from Welsh Government for the SDF element. So in effect, it works, Andrew, correct me now, but I think it works out about every pound that we contribute, there's about £8 of external grant. So our total contribution this year is just over 15,000, which has actually remained the same. Well, it's actually slightly reduced and then remained the same for the last few years. So it represents outstanding value for money in terms of the leverage with external funding.
So not dissimilar in a round way with the internal drainage district between part of Lower Wye and part of Cardiff, Newport and Monmouthshire. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Webb.
Well, I was going to say it is a complicated formula, but it would probably be similar to the national park. Our contribution towards the national park. Yeah. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, members?
Could we change contribute to something different? Yeah. It meant a money thing.
Okay, are we happy to say that we're satisfied with the plan? Yes? Okay. Thank you both for coming today. Thank you ever so much. We will now move on to item 6, Budget Monitor Report, month 7. Do you want me to hand over to you?
Just to ask the committee, we've got the finance officers here to present the papers to you, and I was just going to call Frances, and here she is.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe it's probably best for me to open up in the first instance, just to provide some clarification. I know that members of the committee will have discussed this at the pre-meeting, and just in terms of some aspect of the report, which has been tailored specifically for select committees, but those matters pertaining to operations are not included. And I think agreement has been reached that the opportunity will be here for the committee to sit in on the Economy and Development Select Committee next week, and in order to scrutinise such matters. Yes?
Members, obviously we spoke in the pre-meeting, so Economy and Development next Thursday at 10 o'clock, you will be invited to attend. Can I have a show of hands who think they will be able to attend?
We'll be able to attend. We were supposed to be scrutinising this. Will we have voting rights?
Matt Phillips, who's in the back of the chamber, is that yes, you will have voting rights. I know he's going to look into that, so you've done it very properly. Yes. So I'll contact Councillor Pavia today, and yes, it will be a joint meeting. Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. If that's the case, and those matters are going to be considered at E&D next Thursday, I don't think I need to be here to cover those matters. Is that okay? If everybody's okay with that, I'll see you. I am sorry. I was just checking with the Chair that on that basis that strong communities will be able to scrutinise those matters next week. I don't need to be here for this session this morning, so if you're okay with that, I'll step out and I'll see you next week. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. Thank you all. So we've got two reports which I guess need to be read together in the month 7 forecast, which we'll obviously touch on in the first instance. And subsequent to that, the draft budget proposals, which are currently being consulted on at the moment. It's important, I think, to have the sequence of the reports read in the way that they are, because the month 7 report will provide wider context in terms of some of the challenges that the authority is facing, not just in the current year, but actually moving forward. And those, a lot of the matters that will be touched on in the next few minutes will be echoed and feed through into the budget papers. So just in terms of month 7, just at a top level, the authority is facing some significant challenges. For members who have already looked over the report, the level of service overspend that we are currently looking to try and contain is very significant, probably seen as quite extraordinary in the sense of what we've had to manage in recent years. And the Council has been very successful. As you know, we've got an exemplary track record and in terms of dealing with in-year overspends and being able to manage those situations back, such that when we do get to outturn, at the very least, we are break even or at least returning small levels of surplus back to reserves. Clearly, at a leadership level and in conjunction with Cabinet, that continues to be our intent, and regardless of the level of gross service overspend we're facing at the minute. And as you can see from the report and exemplified by the table in 3.2, a net council fund surplus forecast of just shy of £4 million. In terms of, again, broad context, and in terms of what's driving that, that is significantly being driven from 3 areas, most significantly children's services, and in terms of pressures that are flowing through in terms of looked after children, Secondly, and it's probably seeing the start, I think, of some real pressures starting to work through in adult social care. They were discussed earlier in the week in Health Select. And then finally in Children and Young People's Directorate, and particularly around children with additional learning needs, where again pressures that were reported back in month 2 have increased further and yet again. Coming back to that point in terms of matters concerning operations, and that will be, going back to Councillor Harris's point, duly considered next week in Economy and Development Select. There are pressures that are being contained and that have increased through month 2 through to month 7 around car parking, passenger transport unit, and in terms of planning with planning income. So, you know, in the broader sense possible, we have a lot of strain on the revenue budget at the moment. Clearly, we are not just simply sitting on our hands, and we are not in a position to be able to do that, because as you will well know, the Council is not blessed with significant reserves. It doesn't have the ability to simply just accommodate that and just move forward. We need to react and respond. So as a leadership team, we put in recovery plans, and we have taken steps to contain non-essential expenditure, and where possible to look to generate further savings. But the effect of that, I guess, Dave, has been reasonably limited. And again, because of the extent of the strain that we are suffering at the moment. And so we have had recourse to look at a number of other areas, and again, to arrest the position globally. So if you refer down to, let me take you down to 3.10 of the report, which is probably the sort of catch-all position of where we're at and what our plan of attack is, I guess, to address the current position. So as you can see in the table in 3.10, the forecast deficit there of 3.987 million. We are fortunate, I guess, in that we had already made budget provision for the pay awards for teachers and in terms of pension effect. In the current year, Welsh Government chose to fund us for that regardless. So we have had, in effect, windfall of 310 grand. But the two significant elements, the first one, which was referenced in the body of the month 2 report earlier in the year, about a £1.9 million one-off VAT recovery, and that is in relation to the Ealing ruling and the decision made there around leisure services income. So just on that one, just make sure members are sort of abreast of that. It's a big figure. KPMG have been appointed to work with us at the moment. The claims have all been lodged back into customs. KPMG have got a very, very good track record of recovery. You know, in Wales and across the UK, we've got a very strong case made, and I am expecting to hear in the next couple of weeks in terms of how that has been received by customs. But there is very high probability of that money coming in, and to that level, you know, and as I think Mark Howcroft, who originally brought together some aspects of this narrative, Assistant Head of Finance. You know, it's in the range of 1.7 to 2.1, and we've just positioned it at 1.9 prudently at the moment. We may get some further headroom on that, depending on how successful we've been with customs. And then the final aspect is work that we've been doing with Welsh Government in better understanding some flexibilities that they have provided to local authorities, and I think local authorities generally across Wales are only just starting to understand the flexibilities that are being offered, and those flexibilities are around an ability for a local authority to be able to use capital receipts to fund costs associated with service reform. So this has been very helpful to us. Welsh Government have been very helpful in terms of the supplementary guidance they provided alongside this. So in the past, a local authority would have had to have formally written to Welsh Government to secure what would have been called a Catalyzation Directive in order to do one and the same. Those rules have now been flexed, and it is actually a local decision for a local authority to make. We just need to make sure that we have heed of the guidance in doing this. So what we've done, been doing, Dave, other finance officers, we've been brought together with chief officers and their DMTs and really interrogated the spend that we have had through the year and identified those costs that are associated with service reform and that work within the bounds of the guidance. So we have identified, as you can see there, just over £2 million worth of cost that we are able to displace out of the revenue account and actually fund from capital receipts. So the strategy, as I've sort of outlined in terms of arresting that nigh on £4 million overspend position is as I've just explained. And if those figures come through, as suggested, that would deliver, based on the current forecast, a small surplus of 245 grand. We are not there yet. You will all understand in terms of what part of the year we're in. We are in the winter. So matters concerning social care, matters concerning winter maintenance, those are still areas that are still to be determined. And in terms of how those costs may play through, so that remains an issue, as in fact does those high-risk areas, those volatile areas that are causing the £4 million overspend. So in terms of children's services, adult social care, additional learning needs, they still remain pressure points. Demand is still high. I am getting some intel that there is still increasing pressure playing through in children's services, and we will be looking to bring together sort of a forecast that won't be brought back into select committees. They will be for officer purposes, to just understand where we stand going up towards the back end of the year, and if we need to react and respond to that quickly before we get to outturn, then we will look to do that. So just in terms of the revenue account, in the broader sense, hopefully, Chair, and to the committee, that's useful, just in terms of broader context. And just very light touch, really, just in terms of capital, given the remit of the committee. There is a small level of underspend, which is referred to in the recommendations to the report. That is in relation to 21st century schools, and clearly our capital financing is benefiting from that underspend. Capital receipts are shown latterly in the report, and clearly they have been impacted by, and in 4.5 of the report, they have been impacted by this decision to make flexible use of capital receipts. So when I refer to that just over £2 million draw on capital receipts, you will see that figure in 4.5 against 1920 in the table, and that clearly is depleting our available capital receipts. And similarly, and as we get onto the budget papers later on, that will have a similar impact for 2021. But clearly, we need to strike a balance here between managing the challenges and the pressures on the revenue account with clearly what we need to do on the capital programme. So just in terms of month 7, and again, mindful of the remit of the committee, just a sort of broad outline, that's what I want to sort of touch on. Dave, do you want me to hand across to you? And again, I'm happy to pick up any sort of questions specifically.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Pete. I think you've covered off most of what I was going to say, but just a little bit more detail. You'll obviously notice a change in the format of the report from the last time we reported. We've sort of tried to summarise the higher level information and move the data relating to the select committees to an appendix, a separate appendix. Hopefully makes the reading a little bit easier for you. But obviously, if you still want to look at changing the format, if you let us know, we can have a discussion about making it more accessible, more readable, more understandable. So just going quickly through. Pete mentioned the Catalyzation Directive. Some of the areas that fall under this Select Committee, which is predominantly Chief Execs and Resources, we're planning on passporting just over £500,000 worth of expenditure across the capital. We didn't touch on the savings. So of the, section 3.11, so the £6.446 million of the savings that we had built into this financial year's budget, we've actually found 85%, which equates to just over 5.45 million. Of the amount we haven't found, 586 is unachievable and 408,000 is delayed. This is actually a drop-off in performance of 3% since period 2. There are actually there's more detailed appendix in the report of savings performance for you to review. Onto the capital, we are actually slipping just under £1.8 million worth of capital into next year. I think the only amount that relates to strong communities in this report is the bottom point, which is in 4.3, and that relates to Abergavenny Community Hub, 124,000, various property maintenance schemes, 99,000, and 13,000 for an IT improvement scheme. Like I said earlier, we attached the detailed portfolio outturned to an appendix, separate appendix. So if we can quickly move through to that. So we're planning on a 1.131 net underspend. So we have underspends in chief execs, overspends in chief execs of 110,000. We have an overspend in legal of 62, because we've got income shortfall on land charge income, and we've had to spend more money on legal support within social services. We've also got a net overspend in our governance, democracy and support department, where we've got some mainly additional staff costs in our contact centre. So Resources Directorate is 95,000 over. I won't go through them all, but you can see the detail. We've got unders and overs within the department. So of the savings that relate to the resources, that was assigned £1.34 million worth to find this year. We've got a shortfall of our commercial investments income of 56, and we've got a shortfall in achieving savings in travel costs across the authority. They were able to find those this year. There's also got some director's commentary from Pete. Again, that provides you with a little bit more detail behind the figures. And in working through, we have an underspend in corporate of 461,000. The main reason for that is the underutilisation of our redundancy budget. That's 442,000. We have underspend in appropriations of 291, and last but not least, an underspend in financing of 584. That's mainly down to increased council tax base. So I'll probably leave it there. So Pete and I are happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete and Dave. I'll hand over to members. Members, any questions regarding this? Obviously, there's a lot of strain on the revenue budget and the leadership team currently. Would anyone like to raise? Okay.
It's not a question, it's just well done, Welsh Government. Pay Peter, what is it? Steal from Peter to pay Paul, because we don't benefit in any way by their generosity in allowing us to use our capital receipts as revenue. Or am I wrong? No, I'm wrong.
I guess given the specific circumstances being faced in Monmouthshire, and given the situation we've got, as I explained, in terms of low reserves, earmarked reserves, council fund reserves, the flexibility is very much welcomed, as is the need not to have to go through a very protracted process in terms of lodging a request with Welsh Government, which would need ministerial consent. So it is a thanks to Welsh Government, just in terms of having some of the foresight and, you know, providing local authorities with those flexibilities.
I can appreciate, Councillor Chairman, that it does make it easier, but it doesn't mean that we have any more in the kitty, unfortunately.
That is correct.
Councillor Guppy, then Councillor Harris.
I was just talking about the solar farms. I think we hit an issue where you can't generate, or the buying and the selling, and it's going to be investigated to change the mechanism where that we can actually sell more, so that we can invest more in solar farm usage or building within the county. Could you give me an update of what is happening there in view of the tariff and the returns from that, in view of the problem that you had previously or is ongoing?
So I'm just going to try and simply separate a few things, just so that there is a clear understanding. So if I just refer to the monitoring report in the first instance, and it does refer to the solar farm, and in terms of some pressure, some overspend in relation to the solar farm. The reasoning for that is just in terms of some of the monitoring systems at the solar farm weren't operating effectively. That has been now acted upon, and we've been in discussion with contractors in terms of where the fault sort of has lied on that. But the consequence of that has been one whereby we've had a shortfall of income, which is time limited. So that's not going to be an issue for it. That has now been rectified. That will not be an issue for us going into 2021. So it is not a feature in terms of a pressure for next year. In terms of your specific point around tariffs, but actually the issue is probably more to do with grid constraint. So, for example, if beyond matters concerning planning, which are not insignificant, in terms of any future aspirations that either we or other landowners have in terms of developing further solar farms within the county, the issues are are also to do with the grid constraints. Now, those are not easily overcome, and they are not. Let's just be quite clear about that. Those are matters for the national grid and other energy providers to look to resolve. We can but look to put pressure on them, but that is being done at a regional level through Cardiff Capital Region as part of their work around energy and sustainable energy. They are actively pursuing those conversations. I can get an update if you want one. But clearly we will look to work within the constraints that we have at the moment, and in terms of looking at sustainable energy solutions, battery storage is one way of being able to actually spread the load and actually to work within some of those constraints. And again, that is being actively looked at, particularly with the solar farm that we currently have in operation.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. It does my heart good to hear praise for the Welsh Government in this chamber, and I'm sure what Peter has gone through in 310, you're usually very positive, and hopefully we can almost say with certainty we hope very much that's going to be the case. So well done.
Are there any more questions from members? Councillor Brian Shaw.
It was just the VAT receipts that we hope to get, Peter. Is that a continuation? I think some years ago it was called the Fleming decision or something like that. Is it a continuation of that? Is it that that we've paid which on leisure centre activities that we shouldn't have done?
So the Fleming case is different to the Ealing case. And we did secure VAT recovery, but they were for different matters. I believe Fleming was around car parking, I think. That's taken me some years back now. But the Ealing ruling is what applies here. And yes, this has been referenced within the discussions around Mon Life because it was a key aspect of that. And the decision reached, and Mon Life obviously remaining in-house. So they have partially benefited and in year as a consequence of that. But clearly the retrospective element, which goes back quite a number of years, and in terms of lodged claims, clearly that's a matter for corporate recovery. We remain very positive just in terms of having something. Well, I'm hoping something will come across my desk in the next couple of weeks that will confirm the very high probability that has been attached to this money coming back in.
Are there any further questions from members? No? Okay. We'll now move on to the draft revenue budget proposals 2020-2021.
Okay, so it's me again. I think you'll hopefully see in a moment as to why the sequencing was so very important in terms of talking through month 7. You remember I've just touched on some of those real significant pressure points that we're having to deal with in the current year. And if I could probably just do them quickly on one hand again, repeating myself, but those pressures around children's services, adult social care and additional learning needs, just those in their entire, just taking those specifically, they are not pressures that are just specifically to be managed in the current year. Those increased demands that we're having to deal with, and they're at very high cost, they continue. There is upward trend in terms of those numbers of children with additional learning needs that we're having to cater for both in county and where the cost comes in out of county. Looked after children and an increasing set of pressures around adult social care. And that's really what has driven, that's been at the forefront of the budget challenge in effect for next year, because those pressures have carried through and in fact have increased with a full year effect. So as the report touches on there at 3.4, which is really our starting point, a set of pressures totaling £9.742 million. Don't think, I'm pretty sure, I can put my house on it, that that's a figure that we've not encountered before in previous years. We have had, and since the recession, some significant pressures to manage, some significant budget shortfalls to manage. But this is certainly ahead of anything that we've dealt with before. Also, to highlight, and apologies I should have done, just in terms of the further significant pressure that features as well, is around teachers' pay and pension increases. That is again another significant element of that 9.7 million. So it's been a very difficult few months in terms of working with senior officers, the workforce at large, in terms of bringing forward a set of coherent proposals together, and separately and then subsequently sitting down with Cabinet in informal settings to try and get some consensus agreement on the broad shape of those proposals, such that on the 20th of December we took those out on consultation. So the consultation period, which many of you and I know will be familiar with, our consultation period runs until the 31st of January. Our select committees are purposely scheduled in January for that very reason. And then we will look to capture and collate all the necessary feedback from the select committees, from our public consultation, and that will be all brought together, analysed and packaged up, and then brought back in front of Cabinet in early February, such as to inform the final budget proposals, which will come forward to Cabinet on the 19th of February. ahead of the opportunity that you all have then to consider the final budget and council tax on the 5th of March. So, contained therein, and not even leaving the first page of the report for a moment, the draft budget proposals themselves, as is noted in 3.7, we have a remaining gap that we went out with on consultation of 1.178 million. So the job is not yet done. We have still further work to do, and that work is ongoing. Furthermore, to note at 3.6 that I guess, and for the Cabinet, I guess it has been a difficult decision just in terms of positioning a 4.95% council tax rise. That is a 1% increase over and above the original increase modelled. But it's necessary in terms of contributing in part to assisting with the challenges that we're facing. I do want to refer to, I guess, Welsh Government and the provisional settlement for a moment. So just to be very clear, these proposals were put together ahead of the provisional settlement being announced. So we had a budget modelling assumption in these numbers, and in terms of the reports that you're seeing, of a 1% increase. Some commentators could say we have been fortunate to benefit by with a 3% increase as a consequence of the provisional settlement. But we have, and via WLGA, pushed back on that because our very near neighbour Newport saw itself having a 5.4% increase. So there are a number of councils, a number in North Wales, us, who feel quite disadvantaged in terms of how we fared as part of the settlement. And WLGA, on our behalf, has actually lobbied Welsh Government to consider putting a funding floor in as part of the final settlement proposals. If that was something that Welsh Government were minded to accept, and I think the request was, and I'm looking at Phil at the back, I think the request was for a 4% floor to be put in. That would have brought us something in the order of just shy of £1 million of additional income. So, in very simple fashion, it would nigh on remove the budget gap that we're carrying at the moment. I'm not really in a position at the minute, beyond some confidential discussions, to offer any particular view as to whether that funding floor will be introduced or not. We continue to press Welsh Government and via the WLGA on that matter, but we are yet to have any official confirmation on that as things stand. I just want to just drop you into sort of just a couple of aspects of the report, and I guess, and again, before I hand across to Dave, so just to talk about and again, contextually, the pressures. So if you look at 4.5 of the report, just to give you a sort of a broad understanding of the pressures that the authority is accommodating. That 9.742 million you'll see in 4.5 A, B and C in the matters that I've touched on in terms of adult children, social care, ALN, teachers' pay and pensions increase. It's not that hard for you to sort of tot those three items up and understand how significant they are within the context of that 9.7 million. That is what is in fact driving the challenge at the moment. And in terms of how we've then subsequently looked to react and respond to that, there are savings that we've brought to the fore. These are outlined broadly in 4.22 of the report. A total package of savings of 7.98 million, so just shy of £8 million worth of savings. And actually a lot of these items actually do touch strong community select in terms of matters that concern my directorate, in terms of the resources directorate, and also, and in fact, corporate areas which also falls within your responsibility. So it's probably worthwhile just spending a minute or two, and if Dave's happy for me to do that. I'm sure he is. Walking that through just quickly. So as I said, we have made assumptions both in terms of core funding from Welsh Government, that 1% increase. We have made assumptions that we will be fully funded for teachers' pay and pensions increase, and certainly in terms of the known teachers' pay award, that seems apparent in the provisional settlement that we've had. So that's £2 million, just over £2 million of the savings package. We've talked at month 7, as you remember, in terms of flexible use of capital receipts. We are extending that again into next year. There is just over £1 million worth of costs associated with service reform that we're going to look to bounce out of revenue and into capital to help with the pressures on the revenue budget. There are an array of increases in where there are either new charges or increase in existing fees and charges. A lot of those, I think, are in line with inflation, and where we are able to, where we're not limited, I guess, in terms of statutory fees, etc. So across the authority, that's brought in an addition just over £1 million. Something that's creating quite a lot of feedback at the moment through our budget consultation events. There's a 2% saving that's being made against individual school budgets. But just to make an important point here, the actual schools will get a net increase in cash because the increase in pay and pensions that we are fully funding outweigh that. But admittedly, that does still provide challenges to schools to bring forward savings proposals to meet those savings. But as an authority and through the LEA, we are looking to offer support around that in terms of a loan facility and wider support. I've touched on council tax and that difficult decision to increase the modelling assumption from 3.95 to 4.95. That in itself has brought just over £500,000 of income in. We have undertaken a review of earmarked reserves. Given the low level of reserves that we've got, we haven't got a huge number of areas to sort of go at. But one of the reserves that we have reviewed and taken advice on from our Treasury advisors is around our Treasury Equalisation Reserve. So just putting that into plain English, our Treasury Equalisation Reserve is in effect a buffer, and it allows us to ride the ups and downs of the market. So if, for example, interest rates spike, then clearly it affords us an initial short-term buffer before we can reassess and reposition our Treasury. We have concluded that we're prudently able to take £400,000 of that reserve and to actually use that to help assist the budget. In terms of pension contributions, timing's been quite helpful on this one. The actuary has just concluded their triennial review of the pension fund. Our pension fund assets have performed very well in the last couple of years, and to such an extent that the actuary has advised us that we would be able to freeze our employer contribution rate for 2 years without adversely affecting the strategy to actually improve the funding of the pension fund. So clearly, given the situation that we're in, we were only too happy to take that one. And that benefit will, again, be with us for 2021-22 as well. Dave touched on earlier, as part of the month 7, some of the savings and underspend that we're getting from council tax in terms of additional properties being built. We have assessed, this is just for you all to know, this is an area you've got to be really careful with. So when you're setting the council tax base for the year, the worst thing you can do is to undershoot, is to actually set that at too high a level. The consequences of that would be that you would be dealing with quite a pressure in the following year in terms of not being able to generate enough council tax income. But we have looked at the assumptions that we've used. We've been in discussion with planning, with colleagues in revenues, and actually modelled it and made sure that it's actually set at a prudent level. and that in itself has allowed us to bring in a further 322 grand. We've reviewed Treasury budgets, that's brought another just over 200 grand in, and then the final aspect, which again, even though relating to children's services, and I know Matt Phillips, monitoring officer, head of legals at the back, but whilst it's relating to children's services, this is to do with our legal department. They have invested, as you may well be familiar with, they have invested in childcare solicitors. The aim and intention of that is to avoid having to continue to incur very expensive external legal advice. So we've brought in £100,000 of savings next year as a consequence of that, and those investments in additional solicitors are already being made. And then finally, just in terms of the MIST project, which is a joint project that we are currently doing with Blaenau Gwent in social care, and actually is one of the interventions that we have that is helping to actually contain and actually reduce some of the pressures that we have in children's services and through looked after children. So hopefully I've given you a full flavour of the key aspects of the pressures and the savings, where we currently stand in terms of the budget and the shortfall of just over £1 million that we are still carrying. I've talked about the provisional settlement that we've had and the pressure that we're putting on Welsh Government in terms of a funding floor. But just in totality, still a lot of work to do, and I'm very keen to respond to questions, I guess, as needed. But before doing so, I don't know, Dave, as to whether you want to draw out any further detail now? No? Okay.
Thank you both. I'll hand over to members now. Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I take to 3.18 on your pressures, or 3.5 on your pressures, where you mentioned a figure of about 7 million for looked after children and adults with disabilities. But on 3.18, you break it down a bit further that children's services look into have a pressure of about 3 million. Adults with disabilities, 2.5 million, and children with additional needs, 1.5 million, which comes about 7 million. Where do those pressures come from over the last 12 months, including on the adult social care, including recent demand pressures with adults with disabilities? Why have you seen a spike in these requests?
So I could give you a really short answer, which is yes. I think in terms of children's services, quite unprecedented rises in the number of looked after children cases that we're dealing with. There are numerous factors, and we don't, I guess, given the remit of the committee, we don't need to really just unpick that in a level of detail, but there are a number of reasons and why that increase is occurring. Some of that is because we are being very successful in terms of being preventative and actually identifying situations where children need to be taken into care earlier. Some of that is in respect of the judiciary and in terms of the views that they are taking at court, and in terms of where children are being passed across to us in having corporate parental responsibility. And I think if you read the press across Wales and across the UK, it is a trend that is being seen across the board. And it brings with it, and I think as you all know, significant cost. Whenever you take a child into care, you know, that is an expensive endeavour, but a necessary one, not one you can shirk away from. In terms of children with additional learning needs, it's quite a similar pattern actually. Probably judiciary aside, it is just simply a case whereby we are getting more children being assessed as needing to have further support, and particularly at the acute end where all the cost comes in. So again, out of county placements, etc. In terms of adult social care and the point in terms of adult with disabilities, this is an interesting one actually, and I was something that I was only I've only been sort of made aware of in recent months as it sort of come to the fore. So this is a situation where you've got people, adults with disabilities living longer, which is good. They're living longer, but the consequence of that is that often the case, the parents who are looking after them are also in a situation where they're getting old and to a position where they are unable to look after those adults with disabilities, and that is certainly the case in our situation. I think I can check it, but I think Councillor Easton, I think it's that just over £1 million pressure is in respect of 6 adults, so it gives you a bit of an idea in terms of the cost involved. And again, that is not just an issue for Monmouthshire. That is an issue that is starting to surface now across Wales. And again, those of you who are well read will have seen stuff in the press recently, nationally, in recent weeks about that very point.
So it says to me that our social services section and children with additional needs, we're doing a good job in finding these children, finding these adults and looking after them. But the pressure is £7 million on top of that.
Are there any more questions? No? Okay, Councillor Guppy.
Sort of not really for this committee, but in view of the additional pressures that our schools are facing, that's only, it's getting worse year on. And within our primaries, within our schools, we've got a curriculum change, and that's going to cause additional pressures. And I just wanted to know if the conversations are taking place in view of the curriculum being brought in full in the next couple of years or so, and what plans is this county putting in place to support these schools? You've said that you're sort of offering the schools loans and things, to me, which is just puts up a big red light in thinking, oh gosh, if they're offering loans there, and then we've got this new curriculum coming in which there's going to be obviously new systems always creating increased finance. Are those talks taking place now? That's what I want to know.
So I'll initially respond, and if Cabinet Member for Resources, Phil Murphy, if he wants to provide any supplementary, I'll leave that to him. So the answer to that is yes. I think it's always the case whereby once we've packaged the budget proposals, we then take a look at obviously what we probably describe as more general consultation events, and then probably more specific ones. And that will be driven by the nature of the budget savings in particular that we're bringing to the fore. So in terms of your point around schools, there was a meeting with head teachers last Friday. There is the schools budget forum next Thursday. And I know through the discussions that took place last Friday at the head teachers meeting that there was an agreement that schools look to push communication out to parents, so that parents were at least cited on the draft budget proposals, specifically those relating to the 2% saving against individual school budgets. We saw a very well-attended event that Councillor Murphy attended last night. I wasn't unable to attend, but the Chief Officer for CYP attended. I think there's probably 60, 70 people there, the majority of whom were parents who were obviously providing feedback. So that's all been duly captured, and we've got consultation events continuing now through to the end of next week, where I would naturally expect further feedback to come in. And I think, as I touched on earlier, coming back to your point of curriculum, that is all part of it. It's recognising and understanding, the challenges that schools are facing, not just financially, but just in terms of change, and questions. I think Cabinet will certainly look to take heed of the feedback and determine as to whether further changes need to be made to the proposals before they're subsequently finalised. So the only additional point is just the point around the loan mechanism. So in an ordinary world, a school suffering a deficit has got to put in place a recovery plan I think the rules at the minute are, and again, Councillor Murphy will know, I think it's 5 years is the maximum term over which a deficit can be recovered.
Biggest part of them are on 4, but yes, you are right.
That has proved quite challenging and difficult for some schools. So if a loan mechanism can allow a school to actually recover that position over a longer period of time, we've talked about a term of no more than 10 years, then it gives school a little bit more flexibility to be able to actually look to address its current situation, and given, as you touched on, the challenges they're currently facing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, I have been making it very clear, as clear as I possibly can at the budget consultations, that there is no appetite in Cabinet for the 2% reduction in the ISB. At the moment, with the current funding pressures we've got no choice but to consider it. I've made it very clear to people, and particularly last night, because virtually everybody that was there last night was there because of that, that if we get any form of additional funding whatsoever, we will look to either reduce it or take it away completely. Now that does depend to a great extent on Welsh Government agreeing to the floor. If that's agreed to, that makes that exercise very much easier than it would do under any other circumstances. But there is a commitment, a very real commitment, to taking that measure away should alternative finance become available that would allow us to do it. Clearly, I'm not in a position to say that we're going to yet, because we haven't had a response from Welsh Government, and other lines of inquiry are ongoing. But hopefully in the next week, I should have more clarity on that.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Is there any more questions from members? Councillor Dovey?
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask Phil, how many other councils find themselves in the same position as us? And hopefully they are lobbying Welsh Government as well to get a change of policy?
I can respond to that, Chair. If the floor comes in at 4%, 5 councils, including us, would benefit from it. Most of them in the north, but nevertheless, there are 5 councils that would benefit. Wouldn't actually cost Welsh Government very much, but as Peter said, just shy of £1 million would come into us, and that would make a tremendous difference to the position we're currently in. So I don't know whether that answers Councillor Dovey's question, but as I say, the simple answer to that is there's 5, and yes, the chair of the WLGA has lobbied very strongly on behalf of all of us to try and get that floor put in.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, it does answer what I was inquiring about, if you like. And one of the reasons I asked the question was hopefully people that watch this broadcast, as you're trying to get that message across, hopefully people who are watching this broadcast will gain that knowledge and maybe pass it along, because I think we have a problem in getting the message out with the right sort of level of attendance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Guppy.
Can you put your mic on, please, Linda?
The WLGA are lobbying. Have we got a timeline of when a decision is going to come back to this council, or is it a bit up?
So, slightly unhelpfully, as a consequence of the general election, the one-year spending review announcement, there was a delay in the settlement coming through. So that came through to us literally on the cusp of us going to Cabinet on the 20th of December. The final settlement, the date that's been earmarked for that by Welsh Government is right at the back end of February. I think it's the 28th, I think it is. And bear in mind, Council's on the 5th. Papers for the 5th will have to be released probably about the 28th. So it's not particularly helpful. However, Welsh Government did allow their officials to provide early information to the WLGA ahead of the provisional settlement. I was at a Society of Welsh Treasurers meeting with officials from Welsh Government on Friday and urged them to offer that same information to the WLGA at the earliest opportunity. I do know that the ministerial advice note has not yet gone up to the minister, so no decision has been made internally yet. That I do know, but I'm hoping that that information will be forthcoming shortly.
Thank you all. I think it's safe to say that the committee recognises and appreciates the difficulties and pressures officers are having to overcome at this current time. Let's hope we have some good news in the future. Thank you both. Is there anything else from members now going forward, or Councillor Murphy? No? Okay. Okay. We'll move on to item 8, the action list. All right. Okay. Just to note. Okay. We'll chase up the one for the public open forum. To confirm minutes of the previous meeting. So has everyone got that open? Is there any amendments anyone wishes to make? Okay, satisfied with that?
What date was? February the 24th. Ah, right.
Just to explain, this agenda today was obviously very lengthy. We also had the Strategic Equality Plan, 2 reports for last year, and the new Strategic Equality Plan to come forward today. We felt that it would be too long an agenda, not knowing how long you'd want to spend on the budget today. So we've put those to a special meeting in February. And also, Councillor Eason had got in touch with me to suggest that we review street lighting, have a report off the officer, following the decision that was taken back a couple of years ago, I believe, in relation to the switching off of the lights. We want to have a look at that decision and the future generations evaluation that was undertaken at that time, and then to have a look at whether the intended impacts were actually realised or otherwise. So we'll try to bring that to you on the same meeting, but the date that was agreed last night's chair, I believe, was the Monday, the 24th of February. So you probably haven't heard about it yet because you haven't been notified. I thought we'd raise it today and see whether that's, yeah, that was sent this morning. So is that looking okay for people? Yeah, I mean, you have discussed recently timing of meetings, so really it's up to the committee when it would best suit you, but the suggestion was 2 p.m. with a pre-meeting obviously at 1:30, or would you like to start at 2:30 and have a pre-meeting at 2? 2 reports from Alan Burkitt on the Strategic Equality Plan and then street lighting. So it's 3 reports.
Members? Should we go with a 2 p.m.?
You can't, okay. So 2 p.m. start, 1:30 pre-meet. Yeah. And then just the other thing to flag up to you is that there was a request to bring to you a discussion around car parking proposals and charging. We would like to run a scrutiny workshop with you as Economy and Development Select Committees run, which some of you would have attended one on Monday on the LDP. And the suggestion was to bring it to this committee, but historically Economy and Development Select have undertaken work on this subject going back about 5 or 6 years ago. So we feel it would be better if you did this jointly. So the suggestion would be to have a workshop in March on that. So I'm just flagging that up to you now, but we haven't yet sought a date. Is that something you'd be interested in looking at? I think it does need scrutiny. Officers have brought the idea forward to us and they do want your engagement on this. Yeah. Okay, so it would be an informal workshop, and then when the proposals are sufficiently firmed up after you've discussed them and engaged with them, then we can bring it back through the select process. Okay.
Councillor Eason.
Yeah, I thought you said Councillor Guppy then. Back to the street lighting, could we inform all members, because a lot of members are interested in street lighting, Abergavenny, Monmouth, and who are not part of this committee?
Okay, that's fine. That's a good recommendation. And the Cabinet and Council Forward Work Programme, does anyone have any comments they wish to make? No? Okay. And then item 12, date and time of next meeting. Yeah. That will be the 24th of Feb, and obviously that's an afternoon meeting. Okay. Thank you all for attending today. Have a safe journey home, wherever you may go.